At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI? It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
Today on CityCast Madison. It's the Friday News Roundup. This week, I'm joined by CityCast Madison's Hayley Sperling. Negotiations between UW-Madison leadership and pro-Palestinian protest organizers are into week 2. GOP lawmakers voted yes for an audit of DEI initiatives in state government. The city announced updates to the West Area draft plan after passionate public input, plus sayonara to getting outside for Live on King. It's Friday, May 10th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. All right, welcome to the Friday News Roundup. What's on my mind? What's love got to do with it? Got to do with it? Don't know why, that's all I've got. Let's get to the news of the week. Joining me today is our fabulous newsletter editor, Hayley Sperling. Hello.
Hello, Bianca. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, wondering what love has to do with it, thinking about the quandaries of life this week.
Aren't we all?
Yes,
all the time.
Life and society and how people show up and function. There's still commotion at UW-Madison, as there is across the nation and across the world at campuses. There have been protests. And Hayley, you're kicking us off this week with that story.
So we're here, and as of recording this podcast, we are in week 2 of encampment protests at UW-Madison. And since we last chatted, things were pretty spicy last week, but now things have calmed down a little bit. Every day, how life at the encampment goes, organizers at the site put together a schedule of events that usually consists of some sort of teach-in. There's usually crafting, there's discussions, and there's sometimes bigger rallies and events. But recently, several incidents of violence at the encampment and anti-Semitism around the campus and downtown area have come to light. So university police announced this week that they are investigating 3 instances of violence that occurred at Library Mall, including a potential hate crime in which a student displaying a pro-Israel sign was allegedly approached by an unknown person who was visibly had a knife on their body. And that person said, quote, "Jews shouldn't be on campus." Oh, and then on top of that, UW has suspended 2 student organizations in connection to chalkings that were found around the Capitol Square that were praising Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations. So there have been a few tense moments around the site that hasn't devolved into any outright violence. 2 of the other incidents that UW-PD is investigating, do include, more attempts at violence. But it's basically day in and day out, their protesters and UW administration have been talking, but those talks between the encampment protesters and administrations have essentially stalled out. Organizers claim that administrators most recently offered them a counter proposal without even reading their initial proposal, which is a little bit disappointing. UW didn't necessarily comment on that part, but UW has said that they maintain that ending the protest and clearing the encampment is just a huge priority. So again, the 2 sides really haven't been able to reach an agreement, but it does appear that both sides appear to be open to further discussion. And so at the crux of these discussions are the protesters' demands, of course. And so what they're looking for is disclosure of the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association's finances. So the WFAA manages UW's more than $4 billion endowment. And so the university basically says, we don't have control over how our money is managed or invested. Chancellor Mnuchin is basically just saying, quote, these decisions are quite literally not at all under my control. And protesters are just looking for transparency, which I think is kind of fair because, looking at this, why aren't these disclosures public? UW is a public university. This is a huge amount of money. The people who are holding this cash are also making a lot of money, based on their, the WFAA is a 501c3. So based on their 990s, they have multiple administrators that are making over $500,000 a year in their salary. Right?
Excuse me?
Yes. It's insane. It's insane. So there's a lot going on. And so basically, again, protesters, they want to see financial disclosures. Who knows how they will react when the university says, we don't control where the money goes. But I think, first and foremost, they're looking for transparency, which is not that huge of an ask, in my opinion.
And it really stands out to me that the counter proposal that was brought forward, that it didn't recognize what was already written, that was kind of avoided. That's not a great trust building exercise.
Yeah. And it's a very hard time. I can understand, sort of the plight that administrators are facing because they are meeting with countless interest groups. And, at a recent faculty senate meeting, Chancellor Mnuchin was essentially confronted with the, you can suspend the encampment rules. You can, allow this encampment to happen peacefully. But then she basically pulled out this voicemail that she got that was if you suspend these rules, I'm going to come up and I'm going to set up an anti-Black Lives Matter encampment. How would you like that? So it's you can see the pressure that the university is facing, right? You can see that there are multiple sides of interests happening in this very messy and intricate situation. And of course, Jewish students are having a hard time on campus. First and foremost, there are a lot of Jewish students participating in the encampment protests. There are a lot of Jews who are out there screaming for Palestinian liberation. But there are also a lot of Jewish students that are out there protesting for Israel and that are saying that they don't feel safe on campus. So there are a lot of folks that are bought into this situation, and I don't really know what happens next other than graduation, right? What's going to happen at commencement ceremonies? I know UW is taking security very seriously, and that people are not allowed to bring in posters or banners or anything into Camp Randall, and that they're going to have metal detectors and whatnot set up, which is, not necessarily the norm for years past. So I think they're very much preparing for folks to try something, or they at least want to prevent that happening. So at this point, there's no end in sight to the protests. There's no end in sight to the discussions. Hopefully they can come to some sort of compromise and some sort of conclusion, because it does seem like both sides do want that.
And they want that money disclosure. They want that revealed because they want to know if money is being spent in ways that support the war in Gaza.
Yeah. In weapons manufacturing and whatnot. There's a big list of corporations that are essentially profiting off of war. And what the protesters want is for UW to divest from those investments. But again, it's not a simple and clear-cut situation, but asking for transparency is not huge, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm thinking about all of the different identity groups that are on campus and how complicated this is. And one of my favorite things about UW was coming from a small town in Wisconsin and knowing that the Hillel Center was there and knowing that there is this big Jewish population that I get to learn more about Judaism and Jewish beliefs across the board. And so it makes me really sad to hear the threats and the violence that's coming forward. I can't help but think about how important all of that is to people working together and being not hateful against each other.
It all comes together.
Well, before we get into more news, let's take a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Your work can take you all over the place, like Texas. You've never been, but it's going to be great because you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. Their free Bright Side breakfast will give you energy for the day ahead. And after, you can unwind using their free high-speed Wi-Fi. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you shine. Book your stay today at lq.com.
Another important story for us to discuss this week is coming out of the state capitol, a signal for a continued effort by our state's GOP to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion practices from our state government, including the university system. The news, Republicans on the state audit committee voted to approve a comprehensive audit of the state government's DEI initiatives. That vote was 6-4, all Republicans voting in favor and all 4 Democrats on the committee voting against. So to lay it out, this probe will include an audit of cabinet-level agencies, other executive branch agencies, the State Department of Justice, and the state's university system. So this is actually a deliverance of a promise made last year by Assembly Speaker Republican Robin Vos. He made this pledge when striking that deal with the UW Board of Regents that, had all of our attention when it was budget time. The state assembly speaker was holding the UW's feet to the fire, basically asking them to freeze diversity hires and change your DEI positions. Otherwise, you're not going to get your funding. And a lot of tension was around that. And ultimately, the UW Board of Regents agreed to that. So to freeze diversity hires, and they relabeled around 40 positions from DEI positions to student success positions. And at that time, Voss said, hey, more or less, this is just the beginning of our mission to remove DEI practices, which he's called cancerous. So this audit's going to be looking at agencies like the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, public institutions like DPI, which is the Department of Public Instruction, and could impact things like the state pensions fund. And they'll be looking at, the number of DEI positions that are there, as well as the spending on DEI, asking questions like what did the agency do? Like how much did it cost and what did it achieve? So the battle continues, and same as it ever was.
It's hard when people's money gets involved, right? Like the whole reason that UW eventually agreed to this basically destruction of their DEI programs was because, they needed to get their staff their raises and they needed to get these budgets approved. And now, like, taking that to a statewide level, you mentioned like the pension system, like that raises some big red flags for me and makes me a little bit nervous for what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of nervousness, and there's just seems to be a very, like a wall that there's 2 sides, and one side is saying DEI is extremely necessary and a productive practice and seeing it as a noble cause, and the other side seeing it as the antithesis of a noble cause, in fact, calling it basically state-sanctioned discrimination. So the governor signed in 2019 an executive order that required each state agency to create and monitor equity and inclusion. So, for example, like Department of Corrections, they have an advisory committee that's dedicated to equity and inclusion, focused on hiring diverse workforce and creating those sorts of inclusive environments. Because there's, studies and evidence of bias in our justice system. So, trying to be proactive and trying to address it. So that'll be something that's reviewed. The governor's office has responded to this audit, saying that it is, quote, to conduct purely ideological and politically driven exercises. It's hard to think that that's incorrect. I think it's very fair for having your work audited, and the effectiveness of how you're using tax dollars is very reasonable. The government, just like anyone, should be held accountable for their work. I think it would be hard to imagine that this probe won't be used in sort of political ads and sort of findings as we're getting closer to we're in an election year. It's hard to think that this isn't in some ways an instrument to try and further dismantle DEI, as they said.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, like, it's crazy to me how, a lot of candidates that are on the more conservative side of things, that are on the right side of politics, they're always, people are yelling about witch hunts here, witch hunts there. But like, this is literally a witch hunt, is it not? Like, what are you looking for? What are you looking for in this DEI audit? Like, what is the point? What are we going to come up with? I don't know. It just seems like a big red herring for nothing. Like, we're distracting from much bigger issues that actually do need to get resolved, and like issues with our state budget and issues with funding our schools and, healthcare and all of these like good things that people like use in their daily lives. But that's just me. I don't know. I'm just a taxpayer. What do I know?
Right. One of the representatives I saw, a Republican from Green Bay, quoted saying the governor is basically using DEI to divide Wisconsinites into identity groups against each other. And another quote that it was ethnic nationalism. We've seen Robin Voss say, we're going backwards. Like, we need to look ahead and be colorblind. And I think we're having these conversations. They're having conversations, in silos. I just can't help but think, oh my God, can people come together and actually talk about what's real? Like, what can they agree on in terms of what's needed for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because if you are concerned with issues of discrimination, it should be across the board. It shouldn't just be for one group. Meaning, now it's white people who are being discriminated against. Well, there's a newsflash. Racism isn't over, and discrimination continues, and structural discrimination is, in all of our organizations, and it feels very disheartening as normal. And there's a movement on neighborhood plans in Madison that I feel like at the very least, and part of the discussion is inclusion, who gets to live in your neighborhood. Hayley, what are we thinking about?
Yeah, no, it is. It is part of like inclusion. We're talking about the West Area Plan again. We've had this conversation before. If you've listened to this podcast, we've been talking about this. I mean, you guys have interviewed multiple people across the spectrum talking about housing in Madison, but we're talking about the West Area Plan again. Let me fill you in if you don't know what I'm talking about here. This plan is one of 12 strategic plans that the city drafted to help guide Madison's development over the next decade or so as our population continues to grow, because Madison is expected to gain a lot of new people in the next 10 years. So currently, the city is working on the Northeast and the West Area Plan. And the West Area Plan, if you'll recall, was the subject of some major backlash when a bunch of angry residents flooded a city meeting back in March to pretty much express their fears and discontents with the plan. But a lot of that fear came from like a really fundamental misunderstanding of how the plan would be implemented. So a major aspect of these area plans is the concept of proactive zoning, which essentially creates more flexibility for those who are looking to develop. In most cases in the West Area Plan, the proactive zoning was implemented, or at least proposed, in order to bring more high-density housing to the area. And I'm not talking about like 15-story high rises or whatever, I'm talking about like 3-4-story apartment buildings, those ones that kind of just like blend into the background. They're there amongst the single family homes. But a big misconception that it seems like a lot of people have about proactive zoning is that people seem to think that once it's approved, like it's a done deal and residents won't have any sort of input on how their neighborhood will look. But that's really just not the case. So proactive zoning really just kind of helps speed up the administrative process for developers. It kind of just helps them jump through fewer hoops before submitting their development proposal to the city. So like they still have to get their plans approved. Like that's the major key, City council still needs to say, yes, we like this, or no, we don't like this. There's still opportunity for public comment. And that's how things go now, So that's still how they would function with proactive zoning, but developers wouldn't necessarily have to like apply for all these zoning permits and like go through the hoops of getting like that stuff approved, because proactive zoning would say like, yes, if someone wants to develop XYZ in this spot, it can be zoned this way And it's not just the proactive zoning. There were a couple other concerns, especially around a bike path that would remove some trees. People didn't like that. So the city came back and said, okay, we're listening to you. We're changing some things up with the plan. So initially, the plan proposed 5 spots, 5 areas for proactive zoning, but now that's been cut down to 3 areas. And specifically, they removed proactive rezoning for the Highlands and Regent Street / like Whitney Way area. That was where things got like super like contentious. It also, like I mentioned, it got rid of a north-south shared use bike path from the Sauk Creek Greenway in favor of just putting more improvements into the existing bike path, and it scaled back on some other land use proposals. So the city is set to come out with a new draft plan this week, and we'll see what happens from there. Again, like this is plan 1 out of 12. I hope the rest of them don't go this way. But also, I think it's a good exercise for the city and a good exercise for the people of Madison to become civically engaged. It's great to see people, getting out to city meetings and doing the thing. So we'll see what happens. It's one step at a time. It genuinely seems like the city is listening, but also seems like they're saying like, hey, like we need to be able to make compromises here. And this is about the city's future. This is about the next 10, 20, 50 years of Madison. This is not necessarily about what is going to happen tomorrow. We need to be thinking long term. So this is the attempt to do that. And next steps are moving right along.
I always have to wonder, with these sort of city meetings, what 17-year-olds, 18, 19-year-olds might think, compared to people who are really thinking about 20 years from now, 30 years from now. It's just like, well, you really like the neighborhood how it is now? That's interesting. I might be thinking about it differently when I want to try and buy a home or I want to try and live here. And we're all in this together. This is everyone's city. And so, yeah, it's excellent that so many people are getting involved and speaking their part. And it sounds like there have been changes, like there have been direct impacts from people raising their voices and getting involved in the process. So, I mean, what more can you want?
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like you can make a difference with local politics, and you're making a difference right now by listening to CityCast Madison and staying informed. But you know what those 17 and 18-year-olds probably care about is concerts and what's happening downtown. You've got some news for us, Bianca, some bad news for us.
Some bad news. It's funny because I was going to take it thinking, well, it's bad news and kind of good news that we have something. Grief is always a marker of love, something that you've loved. Yes, the king is dead. Well, by that, we mean Live on King Street has been canceled this summer. Sorry if that was a faux pas, but hey, FBC Live has canceled the hugely popular outdoor live music block party due to, quote, production logistics and sourcing. So, I mean, it was a massive event and it's been going since like 2011 and it's gotten so big. Like in 2022, they moved it from King Street. It was a block party on King Street in front of Majestic to MLK Boulevard. I remember the years when it was like, wow, people are going to like, well, there probably were people on people's shoulders. Like King Street was like bursting with people. And over on MLK Boulevard, the way it's been the past couple of years, just huge crowds. I went last year for Live on Queen and was blown away. And it was not just 17, 18, 19-year-olds. I saw the whole gamut of ages. It was beautiful. It was rainbow-tastic. The party's so dope. I remember running into, Madison Drag Royalty and running into the Dane County Sheriff, Calvin Barrett. Like everyone was out, celebrating their city together. But yeah, it will be canceled for, this big outdoor event, which is kind of sad.
But we are getting something in its place, kind of, right?
Yes. Well, so Live on Queen will continue. It won't be outdoors, but it'll be indoors at the Sylvie. We actually just learned that news from DJ Sarah Aqua, who was on the show talking about Dyke Dive. That party will carry on. Local indie pop band Cat and the Hurricane, and they played last year. They're going to headline that party. So that will happen on June 21st at the Sylvie alongside other musical artists and drag performers. can't keep the queer party away.
No, you can't keep the gays down no matter how hard you try. We love to see it. Yeah. R.I.P. Live on King Street.
R.I.P. Live on King Street. Maybe it'll come back, but I could see how it was a logistical nightmare because it was a dream of a party.
Oh, it'll live forever in our dreams.
Yes. Also, Viva CityCast Madison. Also, made me think if you're not signed up for our newsletter, Madison Minutes, you also want to be there. Stay updated on news. We really appreciate y'all and appreciate you, Hayley. Thank you so much for rounding up the news with me this week.
Of course. Thanks, Bianca.
That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. We're produced by Phil Circus. Molly Sense is executive producer. Our theme music is by Carl Christensen. Hayley Sperling is our newsletter editor. You can get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to Madison Minutes. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with someone in your life who really values compromise? Maybe a partner, your cat? Share this on. I'm sure kitties love the show. See you back here Monday morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take very good care.